Bunesa.
Hook. Approximately 100 words. They laughed at the car before he even stepped out of it. A rusted 1966 sedan, paint the color of old bruises, pulling into a lot full of $250,000 machines. A little boy pressed his nose against the passenger window, eyes wide. The salesman on the showroom floor actually stopped mid-sentence to watch it roll in, then smirked and said something to his colleague that made both of them laugh. Nobody in that dealership gave the man behind the wheel a second thought. Nobody asked who he was. Nobody wondered what those calloused hands had built. That was their first mistake, and it would not be their last. Dushman, if you've ever been underestimated, if anyone ever looked at you and saw only the surface, stay with this story until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The sedan made a sound like an old man clearing his throat when Nathan Cross turned the engine off. It wasn't a bad sound exactly, just honest. A mechanical exhale after a 30-minute drive, the engine ticking quietly as it cooled in the morning air. Nathan sat for a moment with both hands still on the steering wheel, looking out through the windshield at the dealership ahead of them. Glass and chrome and perfect lighting, even at 10 in the morning on a Saturday. The kind of place that was designed to make you feel the distance between what you had and what was inside. Uncle Nate! Liam was already pulling at the door handle. Can we go in now? Yeah. Nathan let go of the wheel. We can go in. Liam was 6 years old and already knew the names of more cars than most adults Nathan had ever met. It had started 2 years ago with a picture book his mother had given him, Classic Cars of the World, and had grown from there into something closer to an obsession. Liam had a memory like a trap for anything with 4 wheels and an engine. He'd started reciting engine displacements to Nathan before he could reliably tie his own shoelaces. Nathan climbed out and stretched. He was 38, built lean from years of physical work, with the kind of hands that told the story before the rest of him had a chance to. Knuckles a little thick. A scar along the base of his right thumb where a wrench had slipped badly on a cold morning about 12 years back. He was wearing a clean flannel shirt, dark green, and jeans without holes in them. He'd made an effort. He always made an effort when he took Liam somewhere. Liam came around the front of the sedan and immediately stopped, turning back to look at the car with the serious expression he wore whenever he was processing something important. The fender's getting worse, he said, pointing. Nathan glanced at the front left fender. The rust there had spread another inch or so since last month. I know. You should fix it. I will. You always say that. And one day I'll be right, Nathan said, and nudged the boy gently toward the entrance. The dealership was called Hargrove Prestige Motors. It occupied a corner lot in the kind of commercial district that had been carefully developed to feel upscale. Wide sidewalks, manicured planters, buildings with clean lines, and expensive signage. Hargrove's showroom was floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides, so you could see everything inside from the parking lot. Which was the point. You were supposed to stand outside and want. Nathan had driven past it dozens of times. He'd never gone in before, mostly because there wasn't much reason to. He wasn't in the market for anything they sold. But Liam had seen the building 2 weeks ago when they were driving back from the hardware store and had asked about it with such focused curiosity that Nathan had said, "We'll go sometime." And then Liam had reminded him every day since, with the cheerful relentlessness that only 6-year-olds can sustain. So here they were. The lot held maybe a dozen vehicles outside. Display cars, not inventory. A white Lamborghini angled just so. A dark green Aston Martin that caught the light well. A vintage-looking Ferrari that Nathan suspected was significantly newer than it pretended to be. All of them positioned for maximum visual impact, the way models are positioned on a runway. Liam walked between them slowly, hands clasped behind his back in the manner of someone touring a museum. "That's a Huracan," he said, nodding at the Lamborghini without breaking stride. V10, 5.2 liters. It does 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds. He paused. Or 2.5 if you get the Performante. Where did you learn that? YouTube. Nathan smiled, said nothing. That one's an Aston Martin DB11. Liam had moved on. They use a twin turbocharged V12. 4 liters. He tilted his head. I think the V8 version is actually faster in some ways because it's lighter. That's true, Nathan said, mildly surprised. I know. Liam was already looking at the next car. They were about 10 feet from the showroom entrance when the door opened and a man stepped out. He was in his early 30s, wearing a slim-fit suit in charcoal gray, with a pocket square that matched absolutely nothing. His hair was done in the way that took effort to make look effortless. He had the smooth, practiced ease of someone who spent his working life performing relaxation. His name, as Nathan would later learn, was Derek Paulson. He was the showroom's lead sales associate, which meant he handled the clients with real money and knew, within about 4 seconds of eye contact, which category a person fell into. He looked at Nathan, then at Liam, then at the rusted sedan sitting in the lot. His expression didn't exactly change. It was more like it settled, like a hand of cards being laid flat on a table. "Morning," he said. The word carried the weight of "can I help you," but shaped into something technically polite. "Morning," Nathan said. "Anything I can help you gentlemen with today?" The word gentleman did a lot of work in that sentence. It was technically respectful and quietly condescending at the same time. The kind of language a person learns to deploy when they've been trained to be professional, but can't quite suppress the instinct underneath it. "We're just looking," Nathan said. "My nephew wanted to see the cars." Derek glanced at Liam. Liam was not looking at Derek. He was looking at a silver Porsche visible through the glass. "Of course," Derek said. "Well, just so you know, we're expecting some private appointments this morning, so the showroom will be a bit restricted. But you're welcome to walk the lot." Nathan nodded once. "We'll do that." They moved past him. Derek stayed where he was for a moment, then went back inside. Through the glass, Nathan watched him say something to a younger colleague at the reception desk. The colleague glanced out at the lot, at the sedan specifically, and smiled. Nathan felt the familiar pull in his jaw, that small tightening. He let it go. "Uncle Nate," Liam said, pressing his face close to the showroom glass to see the Porsche better. "Is that a 911 Turbo S or just a turbo?" "Come here," Nathan said, and guided him gently away from the glass. "Let's look at what's out here." They worked their way around the exterior display, Liam narrating in his steady, earnest way. The kid genuinely didn't need labels or plaques. He just accumulated all of it somehow, from books and YouTube and the long Saturday mornings he spent in Nathan's garage, sitting on an upturned milk crate and watching his uncle work. It was the garage that had started all of it, Nathan thought. Liam had been barely 4 when he'd first started coming along, and from the beginning he'd just sat there with his big quiet eyes and taken everything in. They had been at it for maybe 15 minutes when the situation changed. A couple came out of the showroom, mid-40s, well-dressed, exuding the low-level confidence of people who were used to spending money without discussing it. The woman was on her phone. The man was holding what looked like a brochure. Derek followed them out, and his body language shifted entirely. The careful attention, the slight lean forward, the voice that warmed by several degrees. "The wheelbase on the Bentley is really designed to prioritize rear passenger comfort," he was saying. "If you're doing a lot of city driving, you'll feel that immediately." He stopped when he nearly walked into Liam, who had drifted back toward the entrance without Nathan noticing. Derek looked down at the boy. Then he looked at the couple. The woman had lowered her phone. "Sorry," Derek said, to the couple, not to Liam. Then to Nathan. "Sir, I mentioned the showroom area is reserved this morning. If you could keep to the outer lot." "He's 6, Nathan said. His voice was flat and quiet. "I understand that." Derek's voice had gone professionally patient, which was its own kind of condescension. "But we do have clients. We were here first. I'm not asking you to leave." Derek's smile was the kind that didn't involve his eyes at all. "I'm just asking you to give our clients a little space." He glanced again at the sedan. "I'm sure you understand." The couple was watching. The woman had put her phone completely away now. The man with the brochure wasn't even pretending to look at anything else. Liam looked up at Derek with the clear, uncomplicated gaze of a child who has not yet learned that some situations require him to pretend not to understand what's happening. We're looking at the cars, Liam said simply. Yes, I can see that. Derek crouched to Liam's level in the practiced way of someone who has taken customer service training that included a module on relating to children. And that's great. Are you a car fan? Yes, Liam said. That's an Aston Martin DB11 with a twin turbocharged V12 and a wheelbase of 2,590 millimeters. He paused and then, with devastating accuracy, added, the Bentley Mulsanne has a longer wheelbase, 3,266 millimeters. Derek blinked. The man with the brochure made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Derek straightened up. Whatever he'd been about to say next, he seemed to think better of it. He looked at Nathan with something harder underneath the professional courtesy now. I'm going to have to ask you to move your vehicle, he said, keeping his voice low. We have a very specific aesthetic out here, and the car is... He stopped, seemed to be choosing words with sudden care. It doesn't really fit the environment. Nathan looked at him for a long moment. There were things he could have said. He was aware of them, stacked up behind his back teeth like cards in a hand. He could have said, this is a public parking lot. He could have said, you've been looking at that sedan since we arrived, and what's making you uncomfortable isn't the rust. He could have said any number of things, some of them very specific and some of them general, and all of them accurate. He didn't say any of them. He put his hand on Liam's shoulder. Let's go look at the car, he said. Liam didn't protest. He cast one more look at the showroom, at the Porsche, and then fell into step beside his uncle. They walked back to the sedan and Nathan unlocked it. Liam climbed up onto the hood, which he always did when they were somewhere stationary and Nathan allowed it, and sat with his legs dangling over the front grille. The hood was warm from the drive. Liam didn't seem bothered by the rust beneath him, or the peeling paint, or the way the chrome on the headlight rims had gone the color of old pewter. He was rude, Liam said. Yeah. Why? Nathan leaned against the driver's side door and crossed his arms. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Derek through the glass, back in professional mode, talking to the couple again. Some people look at something and make up their mind about it right away, before they actually know what they're looking at. Liam considered this with the weight he gave most things. That's dumb. It is, Nathan agreed. This is a good car, Liam said, putting his palm flat on the hood the way he'd seen Nathan do 100 times, feeling the metal. It's a great car, Nathan said. And he meant it. Not in the defensive way, not the way a person says something is great because they need it to be. He meant it the way you mean something you know to be true in your bones, something that doesn't require anyone else's agreement to stay true. The sedan was a 1966 Barrington, a small American manufacturer out of southern Ohio that had gone under by 1971. This particular car had come to Nathan in pieces, literally pieces, in boxes and a trailer that a man in rural Tennessee had sold him for $800 15 years ago. The body had been crushed on one side. The interior was gone. The engine was a paperweight. He had spent 4 years putting it back together, not restoring it in the way that word gets used loosely, not just cleaning and repainting what was already there, building it, fabricating panels by hand where the originals were unsalvageable, sourcing a period-correct engine from 3 different donors and rebuilding it component by component, stitching together an interior from materials he'd sourced individually, matching the original specifications to tolerances that hadn't been documented anywhere, that he'd had to reverse engineer from photographs and from the ghost shapes of what had been. The rust on the fender was real, the tired paint was real. He hadn't gotten around to the exterior finish because he'd been doing other things, and because, frankly, it hadn't been the priority. The priority had been everything underneath, the bones, the guts. Liam didn't know all of that history, not in the full version, but he'd been in the garage for enough of the later stages, watching, asking questions that Nathan answered honestly. He knew the car the way you know something you've seen worked on with your own eyes. Can we come back? Liam asked. To here? To look at the cars. Nathan glanced at the showroom. Derek had his back to them now. Maybe somewhere else, he said. Liam accepted this without argument. He slid off the hood and walked around to the passenger door, and Nathan got in on his side, and the old sedan started on the second try with its characteristic sound. Not a roar, not a purr, something more individual than either. and they backed out of the lot. Nathan pulled out onto the main road. In the side mirror, he watched the dealership recede. Through the glass front, he could see Derek still with the couple, gesturing at something. The Bentley, probably. Or the Porsche. Something appropriate. "Uncle Nate," Liam said. "Yeah." "That man didn't know what kind of car this is, did he?" It wasn't quite a question. Nathan glanced at him. Liam was looking out the window at the passing street, chin in hand, with that expression he wore when he was working something out. "No," Nathan said. "He didn't." If he knew, would he have been nicer? Nathan thought about that honestly for a moment, the way he tried to think about most things. Not the quick answer, the careful one. "Maybe," he said finally, "but that's not really a good reason to be nicer to someone." Liam turned that over. "Because you should be nice anyway. Because you should see people before you see what they're driving." Liam nodded slowly like he was filing this away. He turned back to the window. They rode in comfortable quiet for a few blocks, the engine ticking along steadily beneath them. "The suspension sounds better," Liam said eventually. "I adjusted it last week." "I thought so." He paused. "It was pulling left." "Little bit." "It's not anymore." Nathan smiled at the road. "No," he said, "it's not." They drove home through the late morning streets, the rusted old car carrying them steady and certain, the engine warm and patient beneath the battered hood, everything working exactly as it was supposed to. Nathan dropped Liam off at his sister's house just before noon. Carol met them at the door the way she always did, barefoot, coffee in hand, the particular expression she wore when she was trying to figure out if something had happened that she needed to know about. She read Liam first, the way mothers do, scanning him for distress or damage. "How was it?" she asked. "Good," Liam said, already pushing past her toward the kitchen. "The salesman was rude. Uncle Nate didn't yell at him." He said this last part with a tone that suggested he wasn't entirely sure if that had been the right call. Carol looked at Nathan over the top of her coffee mug. "Rude how?" "The car," Nathan said simply. She didn't need more than that. She'd grown up watching their father's reaction to the same thing, the way people assumed a man's worth from whatever he was driving. She made a face that said of course and stepped aside to let Nathan in. He stayed for 40 minutes, had coffee he didn't really want, listened to Carol talk about a problem at her job that seemed to be mostly about a coworker who sent passive-aggressive emails, and let Liam show him a drawing he'd done that week. A car, naturally, with impossible proportions and tremendous personality. Nathan told him it was a good drawing. Liam said he knew and went back to whatever he was doing. On the drive back to his own place, Nathan didn't think about Derek Paulson. He tried not to, at least, and mostly succeeded. The thing that stuck with him wasn't the embarrassment. He'd had enough experience with that particular flavor of dismissal that it didn't sink its hooks in the way it once might have. What stayed with him was smaller and harder to name. The expression on the couple's faces when Liam had rattled off the wheelbase measurements. That flicker of surprised attention, quick as a bird taking off, as if the boy had briefly materialized from the background and become real. He didn't like what that said about people. He also knew it was accurate. He spent the rest of the afternoon in the garage. That was where Nathan Cross was most himself. Not in the way that gets romanticized, not some mystical union of man and machine, but in the simpler sense that the garage was the one place where his particular way of thinking had always been genuinely useful. He thought in systems. He thought in tolerances and material behavior and cause and effect chains that most people couldn't see because they'd never had a reason to learn to see them. In most areas of life, that cast of mind made him difficult to talk to at parties. In the garage, it made him very good at what he did. What he did these days was small jobs, tune-ups, electrical diagnosis, the occasional brake job for someone in the neighborhood who'd heard he knew what he was doing. He kept it quiet and modest by design. There'd been a period, roughly his early 30s, when the work had been larger, much larger. But he didn't spend time in that period anymore if he could avoid it, and mostly he could avoid it. He was under the frame of a neighbor's early 2000s pickup, checking the front CV axle for the clicking noise the owner had described, when the work settled over him the way it always did. Not like calm exactly, but like focus. which is a different thing. Calm is an absence. Focus is a presence, something that moves in and fills the space where the noise usually lives. He didn't hear the car pull up. He was aware of it only when he heard footsteps on the concrete near the garage door. And even then, he finished what he was looking at before he rolled out from under the truck. He expected a neighbor, someone dropping off something, or wanting to ask about the pickup, or just passing through the alley. Instead, he found himself looking at a woman he'd never seen before. She was standing just inside the open garage door, looking not at him, but at the 1966 Barrington sedan parked along the near wall. It sat where it always sat after a drive, between his workbench and the storage shelves, under the better lighting so he could see it clearly. She was looking at it the way he looked at things he needed to understand, thoroughly, with patience. She was somewhere in her late 50s, though she carried it in the way some people do, where the number doesn't quite land. Her clothes were well made without being showy. A dark coat, good leather shoes, no jewelry except a watch. Her hair was mostly silver, worn short. She looked like someone who had stopped caring about what impression she made in other people's minds without any drama about it. That kind of woman. "Can I help you?" Nathan said. She turned. If she was startled, she covered it completely. "I apologize for walking in. Your garage door was open." "It's all right." She looked back at the sedan. "This is the car from Hargrove's lot this morning." He stood up from the creeper and pulled a rag from his back pocket. "That's right. I arrived just as you were leaving. I almost flagged you down." She said it matter-of-factly, like flagging down a stranger to discuss his car was a perfectly normal impulse that simply hadn't been acted on in time. "You were at Hargrove's?" "I was." A pause. Not for anything in particular. They knew I was in town and invited me to look at some pieces. I declined most of them. She took a step toward the Barrington without asking, which should have felt presumptuous and somehow didn't. "May I?" "Go ahead." She moved around the front of the car with the unhurried attention of someone who understood what she was looking at. She crouched at the driver's side door sill, looking at where the door met the rocker panel. She stood up and moved to the rear quarter, tilting her head at an angle. She ran one finger, very lightly, along the crease that ran the length of the body, the signature line of the Barrington 66 that most people who knew about the car at all cited as its best design feature. Nathan watched her and said nothing. He was trying to figure out what she was seeing. Most people who looked at the car saw the rust, the dull paint, the mismatched sheen where he'd done some preliminary prep work on a door panel and not gotten back to it. She was looking at something else. That was clear. She stopped at the rear fender and got close enough that Nathan almost said something about the rust there. But she wasn't looking at the rust. She was looking beneath it, or behind it, or through it, her eyes tracking the shape rather than the surface. "Who did the rear quarter panel?" she asked. "I did." She glanced at him. "When?" "About 3 years ago. The original was crushed." She looked back at the fender for another moment. "You fabricated it?" "Yes." "From sheet stock?" "Yes." She straightened. "It's within a millimeter of the original profile, maybe less." She wasn't flattering him. She said it with the brisk precision of someone stating a dimension they'd just measured with their eye. "The crown on the upper section is a touch more pronounced than the factory spec, but I suspect that was intentional." Nathan looked at her steadily. "The factory spec had a flaw. The original crown didn't shed water cleanly above the wheel arch." "So you corrected it?" "I corrected it." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, once, as if something had been confirmed that she'd suspected but hadn't been certain of. She moved along the car to the hood, which was closed. She didn't try to open it. "What's underneath?" 318 small block, rebuilt from components, period-appropriate carburation. He paused. "The heads are from a different donor, same year, 2 months later in production. The casting's actually better, slightly thicker in the exhaust port wall." "You matched the manifolds?" "Had to make a bracket adapter for the driver's side, 1/4-inch offset." He added, because he always tried to be accurate, "It's not invisible if you know what you're looking for." "But it's solid." "It's very solid." She put both hands in her coat pockets. She was looking at the car again, the full length of it, with an expression he recognized, the look of someone doing the math, tallying what they were seeing against what they knew. "The interior?" she asked. "Done. Period cloth reconstructed from photographs and two partial examples I found. One in Wisconsin, one outside of Tulsa. The headliner compound was the problem. I had to source the original type of cotton backing from a specialty textile supplier in North Carolina and work backward. How long did the interior take? 8 months. On and off, I had other things happening. She turned to look at him properly for the first time since she'd arrived. Not a glance, but a full look. She was assessing something now beyond the car. My name is Vivian Sterling, she said. Nathan had not heard that name in a long time, but he had heard it. His mind did the brief, involuntary thing of matching the name to what he knew about it. Not a social recognition, more like a file opening. Vivian Sterling. The Sterling Collection. 18 vehicles, 7 countries, 4 of them considered among the most significant surviving examples of their respective marques in the world. The woman who had single-handedly funded the restoration and display of the Callaway Dreiser Type 7 in 2009, which most people in the field had believed was beyond recovery. The woman whose opinion on pre-war coachwork was treated in certain circles as something close to final. He said, Nathan Cross. Something moved in her face. It wasn't surprise, exactly. It was more like the click of a key turning. I know, she said quietly. He looked at her. From this morning? No. She said it without elaboration, and the absence of elaboration said everything. She hadn't heard his name for the first time this morning. She'd known it before she walked into the garage. He let that settle. He wasn't sure how he felt about it. He was aware that he was slightly more guarded now than he'd been 60 seconds ago, and he was aware that the guardedness was partly irrational, because she hadn't done anything wrong. Knowing who someone is isn't an offense, but it changes something. The moment when you realize a conversation you thought was accidental turns out to be more deliberate than it appeared. How did you find the garage? He asked. The plate on the sedan. I called in a favor with someone who could run it. She said it plainly, without apology. I considered whether that was intrusive. I decided I'd rather know. He found, oddly, that he appreciated the honesty. There were several ways she could have framed that. Could have made it sound more casual, more accidental. Could have implied she'd just asked around the neighborhood. She hadn't. She'd said, I wanted to know, so I found out. What is it you want, Miss Sterling? He said. She looked at the Barrington one more time, then back at him. To ask you something first, she said, if that's all right. He waited. Why the Barrington? She asked. Of everything. A manufacturer almost nobody remembers. No celebrity provenance, no racing history, no serious collector market. You could have built something with more recognition, more return, if nothing else. Nathan considered that. It wasn't a question he'd been asked before, partly because almost nobody who saw the car knew enough about it to ask it intelligently. My father had a print on his shop wall, he said finally. A photograph. Black and white. A Barrington 66, shot from the 3/4 rear. He never said much about it, just that it was the best proportioned American body of the mid-60s. He thought it was the one Detroit almost got right. Not the styling department chasing trends, but an actual shape that meant something. He stopped. He died when I was 22. I found the car 3 years later. Vivian Sterling was quiet for a moment. Did he ever tell you why he thought that? About the proportions? He said the waistline sat where a waistline was supposed to sit, not dictated by fashion, dictated by the way the human eye reads a horizontal form. Nathan glanced at the car. He was right. She nodded slowly. There was something in her face that wasn't pity. He would have reacted badly to pity, but was something adjacent to recognition. The specific look of a person who has also lost someone and has also carried what was left behind. How long have you been in Mill Haven? She asked. 7 years? Doing tune-ups and brake jobs? It wasn't a dig. She said it with neutral accuracy, the way you'd describe weather. He answered it the same way. And what I want to do, when I want to do it. The Barrington, he agreed. She looked at the car again for a long moment. Outside, a truck went by on the street. The afternoon light had changed while they'd been talking. Lower now, coming through the west-facing gap in the garage door, and catching the old sedan at an angle that made the surface imperfections disappear entirely and left only the shape, the long, clean body, the line his father had loved. Vivian Sterling looked at it in that light and said, almost to herself, "You know what you did here. I know what I tried to do." "No." She shook her head slightly. "You know what you did. There's a difference, and I think you've spent a while pretending there isn't." She met his eyes again. "That panel work is better than anything I've seen come out of the 4 major restoration houses in the last decade. The hand-formed compound curves on the rear quarter alone. Most of those shops don't have anybody who can do that. They send it out. Some of them send it overseas." A pause. "You're sitting in a garage in Mill Haven doing oil changes." Nathan didn't answer right away. There were several layers to what she'd said, and he wanted to be honest in what he said back rather than just reactive. "I know what I gave up," he said. "I'm not asking if you know." She wasn't pushing. Her voice was measured. "I'm wondering if you know what you're continuing to give up. There's a difference there, too." He looked at her steadily. "What did you want to ask me, Ms. Sterling?" She reached into her coat pocket and took out a card. She held it, but didn't offer it yet. "I'm assembling a team for a project that's been about 4 years in the development. 3 vehicles, all pre-war European coachwork, 2 of them in condition that would require the kind of hand fabrication that almost nobody does anymore. The third requires an engine rebuild from an incomplete set of original components." She paused. "The project has a home at the Aldermore Institute in Geneva. Resources are not the constraint." The Aldermore Institute. Nathan knew the name. Everybody in the field knew the name. "What's the constraint?" he asked. "Finding the right people," she said simply. "I've been looking for 3 years. I have 2 of the 4 positions filled. The third I've had to pass on twice because the work wasn't good enough." She looked at the Barrington again. "The 4th I've been stuck on." Nathan said nothing. "The rear quarter panel," she said. "That's the 4th position." She held out the card. "I'm not asking for an answer today." He looked at the card. He didn't take it. "I have a nephew who expects me every Saturday," he said. "I'm aware that's not a no," she said. There was something close to dry humor in it. He took the card. It was plain. Just her name, a phone number, and an email address. No title, no logo, no company name. "How long are you in Mill Haven?" he asked. 2 more days. I have other business." She buttoned her coat. It was cooling down, the garage losing its afternoon warmth. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Cross. I don't make this kind of approach. Usually people come to me." She glanced at the sedan. "I saw that car in a parking lot and recognized a level of craft that I haven't seen in a very long time. Possibly the best hand-formed bodywork I've encountered in 20 years of doing this seriously. And I thought, whoever did this is either someone I've never heard of, in which case I'm about to have an extraordinary conversation, or it's someone I've heard of but haven't been able to find. And then they told me the plate came back to a Nathan Cross in Mill Haven, and I knew which it was." He looked at the card in his hand. "I wasn't hiding." "No," she said. "I don't think you were. I think you just stopped raising your hand." She nodded once, the same economical nod from earlier, and walked toward the garage door. At the threshold she stopped, her back still half turned. "The boy," she said. "At the dealership. He knew the wheelbase of a DB11. "He knows everything," Nathan said. There was something in his voice that wasn't pride so much as fact, the same way you'd say the sky was blue. Vivian Sterling smiled, the first actual smile he'd seen from her, brief and real. "He's been watching someone work," she said. She walked out into the afternoon. Nathan heard her car start a moment later. Something quiet and well-maintained, he noted without meaning to, the low hum of an engine that had been properly cared for. And then the sound faded down the alley and was gone. He stood in the garage for a while after that, the card in his hand, the Barrington sitting silent beside him in the fading light. He turned the card over, blank on the back. Just the one side, just her name, just a number. He set it on the workbench next to the socket set he'd been using before any of this started. Then he went and lay back down under the pickup to finish looking at the CV axle. Because there was a neighbor waiting for an answer and the work didn't stop because unexpected things happened. But his mind wasn't entirely on the axle. It kept moving back to what she'd said. Not the offer. That was a separate thing. Something to think about separately. The other thing, the thing about the card. You just stopped raising your hand. He found the problem with the axle. Torn boot, grease already migrating out. The joint itself still salvageable if he got to it quickly. He made a note of the parts he'd need. He lay there under the truck for another minute without moving, listening to the quiet of the garage, the faint sounds of the street outside, the small, settling sounds the Barrington made as the metal cooled. The best years of his working life had been built on exactly what was in that car across the room. The patience to fabricate what couldn't be bought. The willingness to work on something for 4 years without a deadline and without an audience. The fact that his father's voice, when he described that body line, had been the most certain he had ever sounded about anything. Nathan rolled out from under the truck. He sat up on the creeper and looked at the Barrington. He picked up the card from the workbench and slid it into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt, close to where his heart was, which was not a thing he would have said out loud to anyone, and which he thought about only for a second before he got up to close the garage for the night. He didn't call Vivian Sterling that night, or the next day. He put the card in the small ceramic dish on the kitchen counter where he kept loose change and a spare house key and the occasional thing he didn't know what to do with yet. It sat there through Sunday. He looked at it probably 4 times more than he intended to, which he noticed and didn't comment on, even to himself. Sunday he called Carol to check on Liam, who had apparently spent most of the day drawing cars again, and had asked Carol 3 times whether a Barrington 66 was rarer than a pre-war Bugatti. Carol had not known the answer. She called Nathan to find out, which she presented as a minor inconvenience, and which was clearly, underneath that, something she found quietly wonderful about her son. "It depends what you mean by rare," Nathan told her. "By surviving numbers, the Bugatti. But the Barrington 66 is rarer in terms of people who actually know it exists." "That is not going to satisfy him," Carol said. "Tell him both things. He'll figure out what he thinks." She paused. "You okay? How are you doing after yesterday?" "Fine," he said. "Nathan." "I'm fine, Carol. Someone interesting came by the garage." She waited for more. He didn't give it. She let it go, because she'd known him long enough to know when he was processing something and when pressing on it would only make him close further. Monday, he took the pickup back to his neighbor, a retired postal worker named Gerald, who shook Nathan's hand with genuine warmth and paid him in cash and tried, as he always did, to give him more than they'd agreed on. Nathan, as he always did, gave back the extra. It was Tuesday morning, his second coffee going cold on the workbench beside him, when his phone rang and the number on the screen wasn't one he recognized. He answered it. "Mr. Cross." Vivian Sterling's voice was exactly as it had been in the garage, measured, direct, no opening filler. "I hope I'm not interrupting something." "You're not." "I have a situation I didn't anticipate." A brief pause, which from her felt significant. She didn't seem like a person who paused without reason. "Hargrove Prestige Motors has asked me to attend a small function this morning, a private viewing of a vehicle they've just acquired. They were quite insistent, and I had a reason to agree that I won't go into." Another pause. "I'm telling you this because they've also learned, I'm not sure how, these things get around, that I visited your garage Saturday afternoon. Derek Paulson called my hotel last evening." Nathan said nothing. "He'd like to make an impression," she said, and the neutrality in her voice as she said it was itself a kind of judgment. "He suggested that it would be meaningful if the car I'd come to see were present at the viewing. For context," he said. "He wants the Barrington at his showroom." "That's what he wants, yes?" She let that sit. "I told him I would ask you. I am asking you. I want to be clear that I have no stake in your answer either way, and I will not think less of you if the answer is no." Nathan looked at the Barrington across the garage. It looked the same as it always did. Rust on the fender, tired paint, the long, clean body underneath all of it, holding its shape the way it had been holding its shape for 4 years of patient work. "What time?" he said. A short silence. 10 o'clock. He looked at his watch. It was 8:40. I'll be there. He called Carol next. I need Liam for a couple hours this morning, he said. It's a school day. I know. A pause. Nathan, what's going on? I'll explain later. Can you bring him? You should come too. She didn't answer immediately. He heard her thinking. That particular quality of silence she had when she was weighing something. You're being weird, she said finally. I know. Fine, she said. Give me 45 minutes. He spent that 45 minutes doing something he hadn't planned to do for another few weeks. He pulled the portable DA sander from the shelf, found the compound he'd been saving, and spent 30 minutes on the Barrington's driver's side door and the front fender. Not the rust, not yet, but the surface above it, the area that was already prepped, knocking down the dull oxidation that had settled over the base coat he'd laid 18 months ago and never finished. He worked quickly, not rushing, which was a different thing. When he was done, he stood back. That section of the car, from the A-pillar to just ahead of the rear door, had a depth to it now that the rest of the car didn't. You could see what the paint was supposed to do when it was alive. The color was a deep, specific green that wasn't quite forest and wasn't quite olive, something the Barrington factory had called Garrison Green and which Nathan had taken 4 attempts to match correctly. Carol pulled up at 9:38 with Liam in the passenger seat, already halfway out the door. Uncle Nate, Liam said, landing on the garage floor. Why does the door look different? I did some work. Liam walked to it and looked at it carefully, the way he'd been watching Nathan look at things for 2 years. It's shiny. It's how it's supposed to look. Do the rest. Working on it. Carol had come around from the driver's side. She looked at Nathan, then at the car, then at Nathan again. Where are we going? Hargrove Prestige Motors. Her expression shifted through several things in quick succession. Recognition, then the specific compression of her mouth that meant she remembered what Liam had told her Saturday, then something harder to name. Why? Because someone asked me to bring the car. He pulled his jacket from the hook by the workbench. And because I think it's the right thing to do. She studied him for another moment. Then she got in her own car without arguing further, and Nathan got the Barrington started. And they drove across town in a small convoy, the old sedan ticking along in its particular way. The morning air cold and clear around them. The lot at Hargrove's was fuller than Saturday. 3 additional vehicles Nathan didn't recognize, and a handful of people in good coats standing in clusters outside the showroom. Derek Paulson was visible through the glass, talking to a small group inside. He saw the Barrington before he saw Nathan. Nathan watched the moment it registered on his face, the brief recalibration. Vivian Sterling was standing near the entrance, a paper cup of coffee in one hand, her coat the same dark one from Saturday. She watched the Barrington pull in and park without any particular expression. When Nathan got out, she gave him a nod. Liam came out of the passenger seat immediately. This is the place from Saturday, he said. Yes, Nathan said. Are we allowed back in? We're invited. Liam processed this. Carol came up beside him and put her hand on his shoulder and gave Nathan a look that said, We will be talking about this later. He accepted the look. Derek Paulson came out of the showroom. He was wearing what appeared to be the same suit as Saturday, or one very much like it, with a different pocket square, dark red this time. He moved with more care than Saturday, Nathan noticed. The ease was still there, the performance of it, but underneath it something was working harder. Mr. Cross, he said. He extended his hand. Derek Paulson. Nathan shook it. We've met. A beat. Yes. Derek's smile managed to be both apologetic and practiced at once, which was a difficult thing to pull off. I'm glad you could come, and he looked at Carol and Liam. Your family? My sister. My nephew. Of course. Welcome. He looked at Liam with the same careful attention of a person who had been told to be careful. Good to see you again. Liam regarded him with perfect, uncomplicated neutrality. You told us to move the car. Liam, Carol said quietly. He did, Liam said, not defensively, just factually, because facts were facts. Derek's smile held. That was, I owe your uncle an apology for that. I made some assumptions I shouldn't have. He said it without quite meeting Nathan's eyes, which told Nathan it had cost him something to say it, and he hadn't quite finished paying. It's fine, Nathan said, because that was easier than the longer version. Vivian Sterling had drifted over and was crouching beside Liam, which she'd done without ceremony or preamble. You're the one who knows the DB11 wheelbase, she said. Liam looked at her with interest. 2,590 millimeters, he said. But the AMR has the same wheelbase. They just changed the suspension geometry. Vivian Sterling's eyebrows went up, fractionally. She stood. How old are you? 6. 6, she repeated, and said it in a tone that didn't condescend, that treated it as the relevant fact it was. They went inside. The showroom had been rearranged since Saturday. The floor cleared to create more space. The main display cars moved to the periphery. In the center, under the best overhead lighting, sat the car Hargrove had apparently acquired. A late 1960s European sports car, Italian, painted deep red with cream interior visible through the window. It was a serious car, no question. Nathan assessed it automatically and without effort the way he did everything with an engine and a body. The shape, the proportion, the condition of the visible surface work. Someone had over-restored it at some point, he thought. The panel gaps were too uniform, which meant they'd been adjusted, which meant someone had been in there who hadn't been careful about originality. The small group inside was 6 people. 3 men Nathan didn't know, and 2 women, plus a dealership employee who was clearly functioning as the event's host. They were gathered loosely around the Italian car, holding drinks that were too nice for 10 in the morning. One of the men was talking when they came in, a broad man in his late 50s with the settled confidence of someone who had been the most knowledgeable person in most rooms he'd walked into. Provenance is the issue with all of these, obviously. The paperwork on this one is thinner than I'd like, but the bodywork is correct. He glanced at the newcomers without particular interest, then at Vivian Sterling with more. Vivian, good to see you. Richard. She shook his hand. This is Nathan Cross. Richard looked at Nathan with the polite attention of a man performing politeness. Richard Alden, are you in the field? In a manner of speaking, Nathan said. Nathan built the car outside, Vivian said. Richard looked past Nathan toward the glass front of the showroom, where the Barrington was visible in the lot. He looked back at Nathan. The old Barrington? Yes. Something shifted in Richard's expression, the polite attention becoming something with more weight behind it. You built it, as in, restored it? From components, Nathan said. The body was fabricated. A woman nearby, one of the 2 Nathan didn't know, had turned toward them. She was listening now. Richard said, carefully, the rear quarter panel. Did you fabricate that? Yes. By hand? Yes. A short silence fell, not an awkward silence, the other kind, the kind that falls when a room is recalibrating. The woman who had turned said, I walked past that car on my way in. I thought the rear panel was original. She paused. I've been in this business for 31 years. It's based on the original specification, Nathan said, with one modification to the crown above the wheel arch. The drainage issue, the woman said immediately. Yes? She looked at him with the sharp, uncomplicated attention of someone whose interest was entirely professional. Who taught you fabrication? My father, and then myself. She glanced at Vivian. Something passed between them. The compressed communication of 2 people who have known each other long enough to say things without words. Derek Paulson was standing slightly apart from all of this, near the reception desk. Nathan was aware of him the way you're aware of a thing in your peripheral vision without turning toward it. He'd stopped performing the easy confidence. He was just watching. The conversation moved around the Italian car for a while. Provenance questions, condition assessments, the over-restoration problem that Nathan mentioned once, carefully, and which Richard picked up and examined from several angles without being defensive about it. The woman, whose name turned out to be Patricia Hume, had views on the panel gap issue that were specific and grounded, and Nathan found himself in actual conversation with her rather than the social performance that professional events usually required. Liam had stationed himself near the window, where he could see the Barrington in the lot and was apparently content. Carol had found a chair and was watching everything with the quiet attentiveness she'd had since childhood. It was when Patricia asked Nathan directly, "Have you worked on pre-war coach work?" that things shifted again. Before Nathan could answer, Richard said, "Wait." He was looking at Nathan with a different focus now. "Cross, Nathan Cross." He said both words separately, like he was testing their weight. Were you at the Kellerman Institute about 10 years ago?" The room was quiet. Nathan said, 12 years ago. Richard looked at him steadily. "The Delacroix Commission." "Yes." "You rebuilt the supercharger housing from a partial casting." "Yes." Richard turned to the room, to Patricia, to the others, with the expression of a man who has just placed a face he'd been searching for. The Delacroix 1934 Type 9 that went to the Monaco collection. The reconstruction of the supercharger housing was considered. There was a paper written about it, in the restoration literature. He looked at Nathan again. "I've cited that work." Nathan didn't say anything to that. He wasn't sure what to say. "You disappeared," Richard said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the simple bafflement of someone who had assumed a person must be somewhere, doing something, and has suddenly found them in an unexpected place. Nobody knew where you'd gone. I heard you'd gone to Europe. Someone said Canada." "I came here," Nathan said, "to Millhaven." "To Millhaven." Patricia was looking at him now the way she'd looked at the Barrington's rear quarter, carefully, taking stock. "You walked away from. You were doing some of the most significant work in the field. The Delacroix alone." "I had reasons," Nathan said. His voice wasn't unfriendly. It was just closed on that particular door. Not locked, but closed. And the way he said it communicated that the door wasn't the point right now. A small silence. Vivian Sterling was watching him. She hadn't said anything since the introductions. She'd let the room find its own way to where she'd known it would go, which Nathan understood now was exactly what she'd intended. Liam appeared at Nathan's elbow. He'd apparently gotten bored of the window and drifted back into the conversation's orbit. "Uncle Nate," he said. "Yeah." "That lady said you rebuilt a supercharger housing." "Patricia." "And yes." Liam considered this. "From a partial casting." "Yes." "That means you made the part that was missing." "That's what it means." Liam nodded as though this was precisely consistent with what he'd always believed about his uncle and required no further comment. He looked at Patricia. "He fixed our neighbor's pickup too, the CV axle." Patricia's mouth moved in what was almost certainly a suppressed smile. "He fixes everything," Liam said, not with pride exactly, with the same factual certainty he brought to wheelbase measurements. "He just doesn't tell people." The silence that followed that was different from the previous silences. Lighter, somehow. Richard made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a breath. Derek Paulson spoke from across the room. "Mr. Cross." His voice was different now than it had been outside. Quieter, and without the practiced professional sheen. "Can I ask, the car, the Barrington?" He paused. "When you drove in on Saturday, you knew what it was. You knew everything I didn't know about it." Nathan looked at him. "Yes. And you just—" Derek stopped. He was working through something in real time, and he wasn't hiding it well, which Nathan thought was probably the most genuine he'd seen the man. "You just let me say what I said." "You didn't ask," Nathan said, not harshly. "If you'd asked, I would have told you." Derek looked at the floor for a moment. He looked back up. "I owe you more than I said outside. I owe your nephew an apology, too." He looked at Liam. "I was rude to you on Saturday. I made assumptions about people that I had no basis for. I'm sorry." Liam studied him for a moment with those clear, serious eyes. "Because of the car," he said. "Because I looked at the car and decided something without knowing anything," Derek said. "That was wrong." Liam thought about this with the same weight he gave everything. Okay, he said. And then, with the devastating simplicity of a 6-year-old who has accepted an apology and moved on. The Barrington has a longer wheelbase than most people think for its size. Most people assume smaller wheelbase because the body looks compact, but it's actually 2,432 millimeters. Derek blinked. Yes, I'll remember that. You should, Liam said and drifted back toward the window. Carol caught Nathan's eye from across the room. Her expression had moved through several things in the past 40 minutes and had arrived somewhere Nathan couldn't fully read. Something complicated, something that involved the past and the present at the same time. He looked away. Vivian Sterling came to stand beside him as the group's conversation redistributed around the Italian car again. She didn't look at him. She looked at the Barrington through the glass. Richard Alden has been trying to find you for 8 years, she said quietly. He found me. He found you because I did. A pause. You should know. The Aldermore project isn't the only thing in play here. Richard's foundation is considering a separate commission. Patricia Hume runs the Hume Archive in Edinburgh. She has 3 vehicles in need of bodywork that nobody has been able to take on because nobody in the current field has the specific capability. She said it evenly, not as persuasion, just as facts being laid on the table. I'm telling you this because you should know what you walked into today. What did I walk into? She was quiet for a moment. The end of a very long absence, she said. Nathan looked at the Barrington through the glass. The section he'd compounded that morning caught the light differently from the rest of the car. A small island of what the thing was supposed to look like, surrounded by the weathered surface he hadn't gotten to yet. It's not for sale, he said. I know. I don't care what anyone offers. I know that too. She turned to look at him. Nobody in this room is going to offer to buy it, Mr. Cross. They've seen it. They understand what it is. A pause. It's not a commodity to the people who understand it. It's evidence. He looked at her. Evidence of what you can do, she said, and what you've been doing with it. He didn't answer that. He looked at the car in the lot, sitting where he'd parked it, rust and all, the compounded door catching the morning light, his father's photograph. 4 years of Saturdays. Liam on the milk crate watching him work, asking questions he answered honestly because the boy deserved honest answers. Behind him, Liam was explaining to Derek Paulson the difference between a monocoque and a body-on-frame construction, with the earnest patience of someone sharing genuinely important information with a willing student, and Derek was nodding along with an expression that suggested he was actually trying to understand. Carol was watching Nathan. Nathan was watching the car. The morning held all of it at once. They stayed at Hargrove's for just under 2 hours. It didn't feel that long. That was the strange part. Nathan had expected to feel the minutes, the way you feel time in a place where you don't entirely belong, that low-level awareness of yourself as a foreign element. Instead, the conversation had moved and shifted and redistributed the way conversations do when the people in them are genuinely interested in the same things, and he'd looked at his watch at one point and been surprised by what it said. Patricia Hume had gotten specific about the Edinburgh vehicles. Not a sales pitch, just a working conversation, the kind where 2 people who know a subject find the edges of each other's knowledge and press on them. One of the 3 cars in her archive was a 1931 French touring body mounted on a German chassis, a combination that had been done by a small coach builder in Alsace, and the rear coachwork had suffered water damage at some point in the previous 40 years that had compromised about 1/3 of the original aluminum paneling. Patricia had photographs on her phone, which she showed him without ceremony. He'd looked at them carefully. The damage was specific and serious, and the solution was not obvious, and that was exactly the kind of problem he found himself unable to look away from. Richard Alden had given Nathan his card, a real card, with an address in Philadelphia and 3 different phone numbers, and had said, with the directness of a man who had made his money by saying what he meant, I'd like to bring you out to see the Foundation's collection at some point. No agenda, just to look. Nathan had taken the card and said he'd think about it, which was true. Liam had eaten 2 of the small pastries the dealership had put out and had fallen into a surprisingly sustained conversation with the showroom's youngest employee, a kid of maybe 22 who had been floating on the periphery of the event, and who had clearly recognized in Liam a fellow enthusiast and had started asking him questions about classic cars, that Liam answered with the grave authority of a tenured professor. Carol had watched all of it from the chair she'd claimed near the door. When they finally gathered themselves to leave, Nathan, Carol, Liam, in a loose cluster near the exit, she hadn't said much. She had the look she got when she was storing things up. Derek Paulson walked them out. He'd been different the whole morning, present in a different way, not performing the ease, not managing the distance. Nathan wasn't sure if it would last. People have moments of genuine reckoning, and then the ordinary friction of living rubs them smooth again. And 6 months later, they're back to the same habits with a vague memory of having once felt differently. Maybe that would happen with Derek. Maybe not. It wasn't Nathan's concern either way. At the door, Derek extended his hand again. Nathan shook it. "I mean it," Derek said. "About Saturday. I've been thinking about it since it happened." "Don't think about it too long," Nathan said. "It was one morning. It was—" Derek stopped. He seemed to be trying to say something specific and finding the exact words harder than he'd expected. "The thing is, I knew something was off when she walked past the whole showroom and went straight to your car, before I knew who she was. I knew something was off, and I still—" He stopped again. "I just kept going the direction I was already going." Nathan looked at him. "That's the hard part," he said. "Stopping when you're already moving." Derek nodded. Something in his face settled, not resolved exactly, but quieter. They walked to the cars. Liam went straight to the Barrington and put his hand flat on the hood. The warm section Nathan had compounded that morning. He held it there for a moment. "It feels different," Liam said. "Same car." "I know." He kept his hand on it. "It just looks more like itself." Carol put her hand on Liam's shoulder and looked at Nathan over the boy's head. The look on her face was one he hadn't seen in a while, a particular expression she'd had when they were kids, and something had happened that she didn't know how to categorize yet. Not worry, not relief, something between them. "Come to dinner," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." She put Liam in her car. Nathan got into the Barrington. He sat for a moment before starting the engine, looking at the showroom through the windshield. The Italian car was still visible inside, still under the good lighting. Richard Alden was saying something to Patricia Hume, and whatever it was made her laugh, a real laugh, quick and unguarded. Nathan turned the key. The engine started on the first try, which it didn't always do in cold weather, and he took it as nothing more than what it was, a cold engine that happened to catch quickly on a particular morning. He drove to Carol's. Dinner at Carol's was not a quiet or organized event under normal circumstances. She cooked the way she did most things, with genuine effort and partial chaos, multiple things happening simultaneously, something usually slightly over or under, everything somehow right in the end. Tonight she was making a pot of chili that had been going since early afternoon and cornbread from a box that she'd supplemented with real corn and green onions, which was her version of making it from scratch. Liam was at the kitchen table with his drawing pad, working on something he was apparently not ready to show anyone. He had his arm curved around the pad in the manner of a student protecting his work from wandering eyes, which was new. Nathan noticed it and didn't say anything. Nathan sat at the counter and drank the beer Carol handed him without asking if he wanted one. She'd known him long enough to know the answer. "So," she said. She was stirring the chili without looking at him. "Vivian Sterling. You know who she is?" "I looked her up on my phone while you were talking to that Patricia woman." She tapped the spoon on the edge of the pot. "The Sterling collection. She's—" Carol paused. "Nathan, she's serious. Like, actually serious." "I know." "The article I found called her one of the most significant private collectors of the last 3 decades. "That sounds right." Carol turned to look at him. She had flour on her wrist from the cornbread. "And she came to your garage, and she wants you to work on her project." She mentioned it. She mentioned it. Carol's voice had the specific flat quality it got when she was controlling her reaction to something. "Is that how you describe what happened?" "She mentioned it?" "Carol, I'm trying to understand what you're doing. Because from where I was standing this morning, something happened, and I'm not sure you're treating it like something that happened. He turned his beer on the counter. I'm aware something happened. Are you going to call her? He didn't answer immediately. Nathan. She turned back to the stove. You've been here 7 years doing oil changes for neighbors. You're good at it, and it makes you genuinely happy. I know that. I've watched you. But this morning, in that room, I haven't seen you look like that in a long time, like you were actually... She stopped. Like what? Like you were actually using all of you. She said it quietly, to the pot of chili rather than to him. The rest of the time, it's like you're using, 60%. And you've been okay with 60% for 7 years. And I've let you be okay with it because it wasn't my place. But today was 100%, and it was right there on your face. He didn't say anything for a while. The kitchen smelled like chili and cornbread and whatever soap Carol used, and Liam was making small sounds at the table. The scratch of pencil, an occasional quiet word to himself as he worked. Something happened 12 years ago, Nathan said finally. I know. I made a decision to be somewhere else after that. I know. She waited, and the somewhere else turned out to be here. He paused. Which wasn't a mistake. No, it wasn't. She turned around now and leaned against the counter across from him. But 12 years is a long time to be somewhere else, Nathan. At some point, it's just where you are. And you have to decide if where you are is where you want to stay. From the table, without looking up from his drawing pad, are you talking about the lady with the silver hair? They both looked at Liam. We might be, Carol said. She knew a lot about cars, Liam said, still drawing. More than that Richard guy. She just let him talk more. Nathan looked at his nephew. You noticed that? She kept not saying things, Liam said, with the accuracy of a child who has not yet learned to be tactful about observation. Like she knew the answer, but she wanted to see what he'd say first. He looked up from his drawing. You do that too. Carol made a sound that was almost certainly a laugh she was suppressing. She's going back to Geneva soon, Nathan said, to no one in particular. You have her number, Liam said, and looked back down at his drawing with the finality of a person who has made the relevant point and considers the matter addressed. Nathan finished his beer. After dinner, after Liam had finally revealed the drawing, it was the Barrington, rendered in his particular 6-year-old style, with the proportions that only made sense if you understood what he'd been trying to do, which Nathan did, and the fender rust included as a series of small, jagged marks, because Liam was a documentarian as much as an artist. After all of that, Nathan sat in Carol's living room while she put Liam to bed, and he thought. He thought about the Kellerman Institute and what had happened there 12 years ago. Not in detail. He didn't go into the detail anymore. Hadn't for a long time. Just the shape of it. A project that had gone wrong in ways that weren't his fault, and some ways that were, and the particular exhaustion of caring very much about something in an environment where the caring made you vulnerable to people who didn't care the same way. The Delacroix Commission had been the last thing he'd completed there. The thing Richard Alden had cited in a paper. The thing Nathan had done with a kind of furious focus that was half craft and half grief, because he'd known by then that he was leaving and hadn't told anyone yet. He'd come to Millhaven because Carol was here, because Liam was about to be born, because he needed somewhere quiet to put the work down for a while and pick up a simpler version of it, one that didn't require him to perform anything for anyone. 7 years. Carol came back downstairs and dropped onto the couch across from him. She was wearing the look she saved for the conversations where she'd decided to be straightforward. He wants to show you the drawing next Saturday, she said. I'll be here. He draws that car every week. Did you know that? I didn't know every week. Every week, different angles. He's working on understanding the shape from memory. She paused. He told me once that when he grows up, he wants to know cars the way you know cars. Not to sell them, to understand them. Nathan looked at the ceiling. He's 6, Carol said, but he watches everything you do, every Saturday. Whatever you are to him right now, that's what he's building himself around. She wasn't manipulating him. She was just stating it, the way you state a fact about structural load-bearing. I'm not saying that to make you feel guilty about leaving. I'm saying it because I think you should know what you are to him. And then decide whatever you decide with all the information. Nathan looked at her. You think I should take the offer? I think you should stop pretending you don't want to, she said. That's different. He was quiet for a while. From upstairs, no sound. Liam was already out, the way children go, sudden and complete. She said conditions were flexible, Nathan said. What does that mean? I don't entirely know yet. He picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair. I need to have an actual conversation with her. Carol watched him stand up. Tonight? He looked at his watch. It was 8:40. It's not that late, he said. She smiled. Not the complicated one, the simpler one, the one she'd had since they were kids when something was going the way it was supposed to. Call her from the car, she said. You think better when you're moving. She was right about that. She'd been right about that for 35 years. He drove the Barrington home through the quiet streets with the windows cracked, the night air cold and clean, the engine warm. He didn't call from the car because he wanted to be somewhere still when he did it. But he thought through the shape of what he'd say. He'd want to know what flexible actually meant. He'd want to know the timeline and the structure and whether there was room to work in a way that didn't require him to be someone he wasn't anymore. The person who had been at the Kellerman Institute, performing certainty and expertise for rooms full of people who needed to believe in both. He wasn't that person. He'd built something else in the 7 years since, something quieter and maybe smaller by the measures people used for these things, but genuinely his. He'd want to bring that person to the work, not the old one. And Liam. Whatever came next needed to still have Saturdays. He parked in front of his house and sat in the Barrington for a moment, the engine ticking down. The street was quiet. His garage light was on because he'd left it on. He always left it on, a habit from years of coming home after dark and not wanting to navigate around the workbench. He took out his phone. Vivian Sterling's card was in his jacket pocket. He'd moved it from the flannel to the jacket that morning without particularly thinking about it. He dialed. 3 rings. Then her voice, clear and without the slight wary edge some people have when they answer an unknown number at night. She'd been expecting this. Or something like it. Mr. Cross, she said. I want to have a real conversation about the offer, he said. Not tonight, but before you leave. A brief pause. Not surprise, he thought, but the genuine moment of consideration she seemed to give everything. Tomorrow morning, there's a coffee place on Clement Street, 2 blocks from the hotel. 8 o'clock. I'll be there? Good. A pause. Bring the boy if you like. He thought about that. It's a school day. Then another time. And then, before he could respond, Mr. Cross, you're going to have questions I may not have satisfying answers to. I want you to know that going in, what I can offer you is real, and the conditions are genuinely flexible, and beyond that a great deal will depend on what you tell me you need. He looked at the garage light through the windshield. That's a more honest framing than most people would use. Most people are trying to close a deal, she said. I'm trying to find the right person for a specific kind of work. Those aren't always the same activity. He sat with that for a moment. 8 o'clock, he said. 8 o'clock. He sat in the car for another minute after the call ended. Through the garage window, he could see the Barrington shape reflected dimly in the mirror he kept on the far wall. The long body, the line of it, the thing his father had called the best-proportioned American body of the mid-60s. The shape Nathan had spent 4 years rebuilding by hand for reasons that were never entirely about the car, and always, underneath everything, exactly about the car. He got out and went inside, leaving the garage light on, the way he always did. He was at the coffee place on Clement Street at 7:53. It was the kind of place that had been there a long time. Mismatched chairs, a counter that had been refinished at least twice and showed both attempts. A chalkboard menu with items added and erased so many times the board had a permanent gray haze to it. The coffee was serious, which was all that mattered. Nathan ordered a black coffee and took a table near the window and watched the street for 7 minutes until Vivian Sterling came through the door. She was wearing a different coat today. Charcoal instead of dark navy, same quality, same lack of fuss. She ordered at the counter without looking at the menu for long and came to the table and sat down, and that was that. No ceremony. He appreciated that about her. You slept, she said. Some. Good. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Outside, a delivery truck was working its way down the block, stopping and starting, the driver unhurried. You said you had questions. I have several. Then ask them. He'd thought about the order of them on the drive over. He started with the practical ones because the practical ones were easier, and because the answers would tell him something about the shape of the bigger ones. The timeline, he said. The first vehicle, the 1928 Vandermeer Tourer, needs to be completed and installed at the Aldermore by late spring of next year, 14 months from now. The second and third vehicles have longer horizons. We'd establish those as we went. Where would the work happen? That's partly up to you. The Vandermeer is currently in a facility outside of Lyon. You'd need to be there for the assessment phase. I'd say 4 to 6 weeks initially. After that, there are options. She paused. I'm not asking you to move to Europe, if that's what you're building toward. It is. Then no. The work could be structured so that you're traveling for specific phases and home for others. You'd need a proper facility here for some of the fabrication. Better than a residential garage, but that's solvable. She said solvable the way people say it when they mean already solved in my head, just waiting for you to agree. The point is the work, not where you are when you do it. He looked at her. Most projects don't run that way. Most projects are structured around the convenience of the institution, she said. I'm not an institution. I'm a person who cares about specific objects surviving in a form that respects what they were. The structure serves that, not the other way around. He turned his coffee on the table. The Vandermeer Tourer. What's the condition? She reached into her bag and took out a manila envelope. Inside were photographs. Real photographs, printed, not a phone screen. And she laid them on the table without comment. He looked at them one by one. The Vandermeer was a pre-war touring car of the kind that had been built in small numbers by coach builders who treated each commission as an individual argument about what a car should be. This one had a long hood, a swept rear body, and coachwork that had been constructed in aluminum over a hand-formed ash frame. The photograph showed it from multiple angles and in multiple conditions. What it had looked like originally, in a single surviving factory photograph, and what it looked like now, which was the careful, specific devastation of decades. The ash frame had dried and shifted in several places, pulling the aluminum skin out of true. The rear bodywork above the wheel arches had lost its compound curve, not catastrophically, but enough that the original profile was gone, replaced by something slightly flatter that a person who didn't know the car would never notice, and that Nathan noticed immediately. The hood had been resprayed at some point, badly, and the repaint had bubbled along the right side. It was a serious problem and a serious car, and looking at the photographs gave him the specific feeling he'd learned not to trust entirely. The pull toward a thing, the way a puzzle looks before you start it, all possibility and no resistance yet. The ash frame, he said, needs to come out and be rebuilt. Selectively or entirely? Your call, once you've assessed it in person. She said it simply, without hedging. Your call. He noted that. The aluminum skin on the rear body, it's been worked before. Someone tried to push it back. She nodded. In the 1980s, it made things worse. I'd need to take it back to bare metal to understand what I actually have. Yes. That's 6 weeks of assessment minimum. Probably 8. Probably, she agreed. He put the photographs down. The coffee place was filling up around them. A woman with a laptop, 2 men in work clothes, a kid about Liam's age being navigated through the door by a tired-looking father. Nathan watched the kid for a second. He was pointing at the chalkboard menu with the focused interest of someone who had spotted something important. I need Saturdays, Nathan said. Vivian Sterling looked at him. The nephew. Every Saturday, without exception. If I'm in Lyon during a Saturday, that's a phone call or a video call, but it doesn't get skipped. She didn't hesitate. Agreed. I need to be able to walk away from the project if something happens with my family. Not renegotiate. Walk away. Full stop. Agreed. He looked at her. You're agreeing to that very quickly. Because it's reasonable, she said, and because a person who wouldn't ask for it isn't the person I want doing this work. She picked up her coffee. The kind of care that goes into what you built in that garage. That doesn't come from someone who has organized their life around the work at the expense of everything else. It comes from someone who has organized the work inside a life. Those are different people, and they produce different results. He sat with that for a moment. There's something else, he said. Tell me. He looked at the table. This was the one he'd turned over the most since Saturday, since she'd said you just stopped raising your hand in his garage, and he'd felt the truth of it land somewhere specific. 12 years ago, at the Kellerman Institute, there were people there who used the work, used what I could do, without caring much about what it cost. They needed product. They needed output. Something that would go in a catalog or a press release. And He stopped. I let that happen for longer than I should have, because I wanted to be doing the work, and I told myself the context didn't matter. She was listening without expression. It did matter, he said. The context matters, and I need to know that what you're asking me to do is actually about the cars, and not about what the cars represent in terms of... He paused, looking for the right word. In terms of acquisition, status, winning something. A silence. That's a fair question, Vivian Sterling said, and I'm going to answer it honestly, which means the answer is complicated. She set her cup down. The Aldermore is an institution, and institutions have agendas. I won't pretend otherwise. There are people associated with this project who care about the prestige of it, the visibility. That's real, and it's not going to disappear. She met his eyes. What I can tell you is that my involvement in this project is not about that. I have enough money and enough reputation that I don't need another trophy. What I don't have... She paused, and for the first time since he'd met her, something moved beneath the surface of her composure. What I don't have is unlimited time. None of us do. And there are objects in the world that contain a level of human intention and craft that will be lost if the right people don't give a damn about them while there's still time to act. That's what this is about for me. She said it without drama, which made it more credible than if she'd performed it. You'll have to decide if you believe that. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about his father's photograph on the shop wall, a black and white image of a car almost nobody remembered, held up as evidence of a thing done right. He thought about the 8 months he'd spent sourcing headliner materials from a specialty textile supplier in North Carolina, doing it alone, doing it without anyone watching, doing it because the alternative was to do it wrong, and he couldn't do it wrong. He thought about Liam on the milk crate, watching, and what the boy was building in himself from what he was watching. He thought about what Carol had said. You were actually using all of you. I believe it, he said. Vivian Sterling nodded. Once, the way she always nodded, economical, final, moving forward. Then, here's what I propose, she said, and she laid it out. Lion for 6 weeks in March, assessment and initial framework, with the understanding that the timeline would be set by what the car actually needed rather than what a schedule had assumed it needed. Fabrication work split between Lyon and Millhaven, with Nathan building out a proper workspace at home. She named a figure for the equipment that was large enough that he nearly said something and stopped himself. Video documentation of the process for the Aldermore's archive, with Nathan having approval over anything that went public. Compensation structured as a project fee rather than a salary, paid in stages, with a kill fee if the project was canceled for any reason on their end. It was, by any measure, a serious offer. Not inflated, not dressed up. Serious. One more thing, she said when she'd finished. Patricia Hume, the Edinburgh Vehicles. I saw the photographs. She'd like to begin a conversation about those independently of the Aldermore project. Separate commission, separate terms. You'd negotiate that directly with her. Vivian paused. I'm telling you about it because I think you should know the full picture, not because I have any stake in it. He thought about the 1931 Alsatian coachwork with the water-damaged aluminum, the problem that hadn't had an obvious solution when he was looking at it on Patricia's phone. He'd been thinking about it off and on since Tuesday. He'd been thinking about it the way you think about a problem you haven't agreed to solve yet, which was its own kind of answer. I'll call her, he said. Vivian Sterling picked up the photographs from the table and slid them back into the envelope. She set the envelope in front of him. Keep those. He put them in his jacket pocket. They sat for another few minutes, finishing their coffee, talking about the Vandermeer's engine, a straight six of Belgian origin that had been replaced at some point with a later unit, and whether the original engine was traceable, which Vivian thought it might be through a registry in Amsterdam. It was a working conversation, specific and grounded, and it felt different from most conversations Nathan had. It felt like the beginning of something rather than the performance of something. When they parted on the sidewalk outside, she shook his hand, firm, brief. "March," she said. "March," he said. He watched her walk to the corner and turn, and then she was gone. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, his jacket pocket weighted with the photographs of a damaged car that he was already, against his better instincts, beginning to love. He drove home through the mid-morning streets, the Barrington unhurried and steady beneath him, and he let himself think about his father. Not the version he usually let himself think about, the practical one, the mechanic with opinions about body lines and an eye for what Detroit got right and wrong. The other version, the man who had stood in his shop on a slow Thursday afternoon when Nathan was maybe 14 and had said, out of nowhere, without preamble, "The work doesn't care whether you're having a good day. That's the thing about it. You can be completely wrong about everything else, and the work is still the work. You do it right or you don't. Nothing else affects that." Nathan had been too young then to understand fully what that was about. That it wasn't just about cars, that his father was telling him something about how to survive the parts of life that were out of your control by finding the thing that wasn't. The thing that responded honestly to what you put into it. He understood it now. He understood it in the way you understand things that were given to you before you were ready for them and that wait patiently until you are. He called Carol when he got home. "Well," she said before he could start, "I'm going to Lyon in March." A silence. Not a long one. "For how long?" 6 weeks initially, then back and forth. "Saturdays?" "I negotiated Saturdays." He could hear her exhale, slow, controlled, the sound of a person who had been holding something without being aware of it. "Okay," she said. "Okay." And then, "Nathan." "Yeah." "You should tell him yourself." He drove to Carol's that afternoon. It was a Thursday, and Liam wasn't home yet. Carol picked him up at 3. So Nathan sat in her kitchen with another coffee that went cold and waited. He thought about what to say, and then decided he'd say it the way he said most things to Liam, which was straight, without adjustment, trusting the boy to take it in and process it in his own time. Liam came through the door at 3:15 still wearing his backpack, which he didn't take off when he saw Nathan sitting at the kitchen table. He just stopped and looked. "You called her," Liam said. "I did." Liam came to the table and sat down in the chair across from him, backpack and all. He had marker on the back of his left hand, blue, the remains of something artistic from school. He put both hands flat on the table, which was a thing he did when he was preparing to hear something that mattered. "I'm going to work on some cars in France," Nathan said, "starting in March. I'll be gone for a while, and then I'll come back, and then I might go again, back and forth." Liam processed this. What kind of cars? Very old ones, pre-war European coachwork. The bodies need to be rebuilt. Like the Barrington. Harder than the Barrington. Liam's eyes moved, the way they did when he was doing something internal, filing, cross-referencing, mapping what he'd just heard against what he already knew. "Will you take pictures?" "Yes." "Of what you're doing, not just the cars, what you're doing to them." Nathan looked at his nephew. "Yes," he said. "I'll take pictures of the work." Liam nodded, satisfied. Then, "Will you still be here Saturdays?" "When I'm home, yes, and when I'm not, we'll call." "Okay." He said it the way he'd said okay to Derek Paulson's apology. Clean, complete, no residue. Then he slid off the chair and went to the counter where his drawing pad was sitting and brought it back to the table. He opened it to a fresh page. "Can you draw what a pre-war European body looks like?" he said, sliding the pad across to Nathan. "I don't have a picture." Nathan took the pencil Liam offered. He thought for a second about the Vandermeer photographs in his jacket pocket, about the long hood and the swept rear body,
about the compound curve above the rear wheel arch that someone had tried to push back into shape and made worse. He started to draw. Not well. He wasn't a draftsman, never had been, but accurately. The proportions. The line of it. The way the body communicated something about its own weight and the speed it was built for. Liam watched with his chin in his hand. "The roof is lower than I expected," Liam said. "They wanted the silhouette low, made it look faster." "Was it fast?" "For its time." "What's the engine?" "Straight six. Belgian." Liam nodded, as if Belgium as a source of engines was entirely expected information.
Is it broken? The body is broken. The engine isn't original. Someone replaced it. I might be able to find the original. How? There's a registry in Amsterdam, a list of where the parts went. Liam thought about this. Like a paper trail. Exactly like that. And if you find it, you put it back? If I find it and it's salvageable, yes. Liam looked at the drawing on the pad. And then it's right, he said. Not a question. A statement of the principle as he understood it. Then it's right, Nathan agreed. Carol had come into the kitchen quietly at some point and was leaning in the doorway. Nathan was aware of her the way he was aware of most things, peripherally, without turning. He knew the expression she had without seeing it. He finished the drawing. It wasn't much. A side profile, rough, the proportions approximate, but honest. Liam studied it for a long moment, then picked up the pencil and added something to the drawing himself, at the base of the image. Nathan looked at it. Liam had drawn a small figure standing beside the car. Just a shape, barely representational. 2 lines for legs, a circle for a head, arms that were more like suggestions. But in one of the hands he'd put something, a small rectangle, a tool. That's you, Liam said. Nathan looked at the drawing, the drawn car, the long pre-war body he was about to spend the better part of a year rebuilding, and the small figure beside it with a tool in its hand. Yeah, he said, that's me. He left Carol's at 5:30 and drove home in the last of the afternoon light. The Barrington was warm from sitting in the sun, the section he'd compounded on Tuesday still catching the light differently from the rest. That small island of what the car was supposed to be, surrounded by the surface he hadn't gotten to yet but would. The truth about that car, the truth he'd known for 4 years, and hadn't said to anyone until Vivian Sterling had come into his garage and said it first, was that the rust and the flat paint were not the car. They were the part that time did to the outside. The car was underneath. The car was the hand-formed rear quarter panel within a millimeter of the original profile. The car was the rebuilt straight engine with the better casting on the heads. The car was the headliner that had taken 8 months to get right, and that almost nobody who sat in the vehicle would ever know wasn't original, because it was right, because there was no visible seam between the work and the thing it was trying to preserve. People had laughed at it in a parking lot 6 days ago. A man in a suit had asked him to move it because it didn't fit the environment. Nathan thought about that now, without much heat behind it. Not because it didn't matter. It had mattered in the moment, in the way his jaw had tightened and he'd put his hand on Liam's shoulder and walked away. But the car was the same car it had been before they laughed. It was the same car afterward. Their laughter hadn't touched it. Their dismissal hadn't reached the part of it that mattered. That was the thing his father had tried to tell him at 14. The thing he'd spent the better part of his adult life learning in different ways. Genuine work exists independently of whether anyone recognizes it. You do it right or you don't. Nothing else affects that. The hard part, the part that had taken him 12 years to fully understand, was that existing independently of recognition didn't mean existing independently of people. It meant choosing carefully which people, not performing for rooms that wanted product, not letting the noise of other people's judgments, their laughter, their dismissal, their sudden admiring attention when they found out who you were, substitute for your own judgment about what the work was worth. Vivian Sterling had looked at the Barrington and seen the rear quarter panel before she saw the rust. That wasn't luck. That was a lifetime of learning to look at the right things. Liam had put his hand on the hood and said, "It feels like the car." That was 6 years of watching someone work, absorbing without being told the principle underneath all of it. The surface is not the thing. Nathan parked in front of his house. He sat in the Barrington for a moment, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting in the car he'd built over 4 years of Saturdays, the engine cooling in the evening air, the street quiet around him. In March, he would go to Lyon. He would spend 6 weeks with a 1928 touring car that had been damaged by time and mishandled repair and the ordinary entropy that comes for everything eventually. And he would assess what was true about it before he decided what to do. He would work carefully and without hurry, because hurry was the enemy of this kind of work. He would take pictures for Liam, he would call every Saturday, and he would come back. That was the part he hadn't known how to say out loud before and could say now without difficulty. He would come back. Not because the work would make him need to leave again, but because the coming back was part of it. The work and the people it was done for, and the boy on the milk crate watching everything with those serious eyes, all of it was part of it, all of it together, not one at the expense of another. He'd spent 7 years in Millhaven thinking he'd chosen the simpler version of his life. He understood now that he'd actually been building toward something, patiently, the way you build anything that's meant to last, without quite knowing the shape of the finished thing until enough of it is in place that you can finally see it. He got out of the car and went to the garage. He turned on the work light. The Barrington rolled in under its own history, rust and all, the compounded door catching the light like a window in an otherwise dim building, showing what was inside. He picked up the sander from the bench. He had a few hours before dark, and there was still more of the car left to uncover. Tip. The story is entirely fictional and was created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, locations, and events are imaginary.